Jessica had always known that her relationship with her mother-in-law, Evelyn, was strained. From the very beginning, Evelyn had made her disapproval of Jessica clear in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. During the wedding planning, Evelyn had insisted on a different venue, claiming that the one Jessica and Mark had chosen was too expensive and inappropriate for their family standards. When Jessica wore her mother's pearl necklace instead of the diamond choker Evelyn had gifted her, Evelyn's lips had tightened, and she had said in a low, biting voice, "Well, I suppose your mother's taste is more important than mine." Mark had missed the comment, too caught up in greeting guests and organizing last-minute arrangements. Jessica had let it go, convincing herself that she was being overly sensitive, that she just needed to try harder to win Evelyn's approval. Over the years, Evelyn's barbs had grown sharper, though still delivered under the guise of concern. "Oh, Jessica, you're looking quite tired these days," she'd say whenever Jessica appeared without makeup, her eyes slightly puffy from a sleepless night with their infant son. "Are you sure Mark is happy with you staying home all the time? You know how men are. They need a woman who can keep up," she had once remarked, twisting her engagement ring in that calculated way of hers, the large diamond catching the light just enough to draw attention. Jessica had tried to let these comments slide off her like water on a duck's back, but they had accumulated over time, layering themselves over her confidence like grime. It was only when Mark lost his job that Evelyn's disdain became more pronounced. Mark had been working at a tech startup that collapsed after a bad investment deal. The financial blow was significant, forcing them to dip into their savings to cover basic expenses. Jessica had offered to pick up some freelance work as a graphic designer, but Evelyn had frowned at the suggestion. A mother's place is with her child, not chasing after some side hustle, she had said, her eyes darting to Jessica's laptop with a look of disapproval. Besides, what would people say if they knew Mark couldn't provide for his family? Jessica had swallowed her retort, forcing a tight smile and nodding politely. What people would say? Evelyn was always concerned about appearances, about maintaining the illusion of a perfect family where her son was a successful provider and his wife the ideal, supportive homemaker. Things escalated one rainy Thursday evening. Jessica had just put their son to bed and was sitting alone at the kitchen table, sipping cold coffee and scrolling through her phone. Mark was out, meeting an old friend for a drink, trying to network and possibly secure a new job opportunity. The house was quiet, save for the soft patter of rain against the windows. That's when a notification popped up on Jessica's screen. It was a message from Evelyn. The preview showed just the first few words, "Return the family jewels." Jessica's heart sank. She clicked on the notification, opening the full message. "Return the family jewels. You're not worthy to wear them." That was it. No greeting, no context, just a direct cutting command. Jessica stared at the words, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The family jewels. The set of heirloom jewelry Evelyn had given her during the wedding, a delicate necklace adorned with small sapphires and diamonds that had supposedly been in the family for generations. Jessica had worn it once, on her wedding day, at Evelyn's insistence. Since then, it had remained in the velvet-lined box in her drawer, untouched and unmentioned. Jessica's hands trembled as she reread the message, the words blurring together as tears stung her eyes. How dare Evelyn demand them back, as though they were some sort of rental? And what did she mean by not worthy? Was it because they were struggling financially now? Was it because Jessica had dared to suggest working to help support her family? Or was it simply because Evelyn had never thought she was good enough for her precious son in the first place? Jessica felt a surge of anger rise within her, hotter and more consuming than any she had felt before. But instead of responding, she took a deep, shuddering breath and scrolled through her chat history with Evelyn. There were so many messages, most of them polite on the surface, but seething with underlying criticism. "Mark looked exhausted when I saw him last. Is everything okay at home? You're not letting him overwork himself, are you? I heard from Lily that you've been looking for freelance work. I suppose it's understandable, given the circumstances. You haven't been wearing the necklace lately. It was meant to be a symbol of our family's bond. I hope you're not neglecting that." Each message was a dagger wrapped in velvet, slicing Jessica's self-esteem under the guise of concern. And the worst part was that Mark never seemed to notice. Whenever Jessica had tried to bring up her mother-in-law's passive-aggressive behavior, Mark had waved it off. "That's just how Mom is," he'd say. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But now, Jessica had proof. Concrete, undeniable proof of Evelyn's true nature. Evidence that could not be explained away or brushed off as mere misunderstandings. Jessica began taking screenshots of each message, organizing them chronologically to create a clear timeline of Evelyn's relentless campaign to undermine her. Each captured text was like a brick in the wall Jessica was building, a structure of evidence that she would eventually present to Mark. And it wasn't just about the jewelry. It was about finally exposing Evelyn for who she truly was, a manipulative, controlling woman who had never accepted Jessica as part of the family, despite all her efforts to fit in. As Jessica compiled the screenshots, she thought back to the day Evelyn had first handed her the velvet box containing the necklace and matching earrings. It was the morning of the wedding, and Evelyn had appeared at the bridal suite with her signature stiff smile. "These belong to my mother," she had said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "It's a tradition for the women in our family to wear them on their wedding day." Jessica had felt a lump form in her throat, a mixture of gratitude and unease. She had smiled and thanked Evelyn, slipping the heavy necklace around her neck and fastening the clasp. The weight of the jewels had felt like a collar, a symbol not of love, but of control, as though Evelyn were claiming ownership of her, branding her as an outsider forced to play a part in Evelyn's carefully curated narrative. Now, staring at the message demanding the return of the jewelry, Jessica felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Evelyn had revealed her true colors, and Jessica had the evidence to prove it. All she needed now was the right moment to show Mark. But for now, she would wait, biding her time, watching and listening, and adding each new insult and slight to her growing collection of screenshots. Evelyn had underestimated her, assuming Jessica was weak, passive, and incapable of fighting back. But Evelyn was wrong. Jessica was not only capable of fighting back, she was determined to win. And this time, she would not back down. The following morning, Jessica awoke to the soft glow of the early sun filtering through the blinds. The house was still, almost unnaturally quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as Mark moved about in the kitchen. Jessica remained in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Evelyn's text over and over in her mind. "Return the family jewels. You're not worthy to wear them." The words had burrowed into her brain like a splinter, festering beneath her skin, itching to be acknowledged. She rolled over and reached for her phone, scrolling through the screenshots she had taken the night before. The messages glared back at her, evidence of Evelyn's unrelenting animosity. Mark's footsteps echoed down the hallway, and a moment later, he appeared in the doorway, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. "Morning," he said, his voice soft. He leaned against the doorframe, his eyes tired but warm. Jessica forced a smile, pushing herself up against the headboard. "Morning," she replied, accepting the coffee. Mark sat down at the edge of the bed, his eyes scanning her face. "You okay? You look tense." Jessica swallowed, her throat tight. Should she tell him? Should she confront him with the messages right now? Or would that only provoke another round of excuses? She took a slow, deliberate sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "I'm fine," she said, setting the mug down on the nightstand. "Just didn't sleep well." Mark nodded, his gaze dropping to his hands. "I know things have been stressful lately," he said, his tone tentative. "But I promise you, I'm going to find another job soon. I just need a little more time." Jessica's chest tightened. Mark had always been the type to internalize his stress, to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders without ever asking for help. She knew he was trying, but it wasn't just the financial strain that was wearing her down. It was Evelyn. The constant scrutiny, the thinly veiled insults, the relentless campaign to undermine her role as Mark's wife. Jessica reached out, placing a hand on Mark's arm. "I know you're doing everything you can," she said softly. "I just wish your mom could see that too." Mark's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. What did she say this time? Jessica hesitated, her pulse quickening. Should she show him the message? Should she lay it all out right now? The full extent of Evelyn's cruelty? But before she could speak, Mark stood up, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know my mom can be difficult, he said, his tone carefully neutral. But she means well. She's just old-fashioned. You know how she is. Jessica bit the inside of her cheek, swallowing the bitter taste of frustration. There it was again, the same excuse Mark always used to justify Evelyn's behavior. Old-fashioned, as though Evelyn's relentless cruelty could be dismissed as mere eccentricity. Mark left the room to take a shower, and Jessica remained in bed, staring at the half-empty coffee mug on the nightstand. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were closing in around her. She picked up her phone, scrolling through the messages once more. This time, she didn't just skim through them. She read each one carefully, analyzing the wording, the tone, the subtle implications. Each message was a small, insidious act of manipulation, a calculated attempt to chip away at her self-worth. Evelyn had never outright called Jessica unworthy, but the implication was always there, lurking beneath the surface of every passive-aggressive comment. Jessica got out of bed and made her way to the living room, her steps slow and deliberate. The air was cool, the light dim and muted. She settled onto the couch, phone in hand, and began scrolling back through the messages again. The timeline stretched back years, a record of Evelyn's disdain, cataloged in neat little blue and gray bubbles. Jessica started compiling the screenshots into a single document, organizing them chronologically to create a comprehensive timeline of Evelyn's behavior. Each message was a piece of evidence, a puzzle piece in a larger picture of Evelyn's campaign to undermine her. As she worked, Jessica's mind wandered back to the day Evelyn had given her the jewelry. It had been a sunny afternoon, the air heavy with the scent of roses from Evelyn's meticulously tended garden. Evelyn had invited Jessica over for tea, a rare occurrence considering Evelyn had always preferred to keep Jessica at arm's length. Jessica had been both excited and nervous, hoping that the gesture signaled a change in their relationship. Evelyn had been waiting for her on the back patio, a small velvet box resting on a glass-topped table. "I wanted to give you something special," Evelyn had said, her voice syrupy sweet, her smile tight. Jessica had opened the box, her breath catching at the sight of the sapphire and diamond necklace and matching earrings nestled inside. They were stunning, the stones glittering in the afternoon sun like tiny, captured stars. "They belong to my mother," Evelyn had said, her eyes fixed on the jewels, not on Jessica, and her mother before her. "It's a family tradition for the women to wear them on their wedding day." Jessica had swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "Thank you," she had said, her voice small and uncertain. "They're beautiful." Evelyn had nodded, her gaze finally shifting to Jessica. "Take care of them," she had said, her tone sharp and cold. "They're worth more than you could ever imagine." Now, years later, that moment felt like a trap, a carefully orchestrated move in Evelyn's ongoing game of control. The jewelry had never been a gift. It had been a leash, a way for Evelyn to maintain her grip on Jessica, to assert her dominance as the true matriarch of the family. Jessica stared at the message again, her jaw clenched. "Return the family jewels. You're not worthy to wear them." Was that what Evelyn had always thought? That Jessica was unworthy of being part of the family, unworthy of the title of Mark's wife? The sound of the shower turning off snapped Jessica back to the present. She quickly locked her phone, shoving it into the cushion beside her as Mark re-entered the room, a towel draped around his neck. "What are you up to?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the cushion where Jessica had hidden her phone. "Nothing," Jessica said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just going through some old messages." Mark raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. He moved to the kitchen, pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee. Jessica watched him, her heart pounding, her mind racing. Should she tell him now? Should she confront him with the evidence, force him to see the truth about his mother? But Mark looked so tired, so worn down by the stress of unemployment and mounting bills. Would showing him the messages now only add to his burden? Or would it finally open his eyes to the truth that his mother was not the loving, well-meaning woman he believed her to be, but a manipulative, controlling force determined to break their marriage apart? Jessica swallowed, her nails digging into the couch cushion. For now, she would wait, but she would not forget, and she would not let Evelyn win. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender candles and stale coffee as Jessica sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her laptop open in front of her. It was late afternoon, and the soft glow of the setting sun cast long shadows across the room, painting everything in hues of gold and amber. Jessica's eyes burned from hours of staring at the screen, her fingers aching from the relentless clicking and scrolling. But she couldn't stop. She was on a mission now. She had to compile everything. Every cruel text, every passive-aggressive remark, every thinly veiled insult, into a single, irrefutable document. The timeline she had created was growing longer by the minute, stretching back years to the earliest days of her marriage to Mark. She had labeled each entry with a date and a brief summary, creating a meticulous record of Evelyn's campaign to undermine her. The most recent message, the one demanding the return of the family jewels, stood out like a red flag, a final insult in a long line of grievances. Jessica scrolled back to the beginning, reading through the earliest messages, each one a carefully constructed assault on her character. You know, Mark always loved blondes. Evelyn had texted the month after their wedding, as though Jessica's dark hair were somehow a personal affront. Are you sure you're feeding him properly? He looks so thin, Evelyn had written a year later, after Mark had lost weight due to stress at work. Maybe if you dressed a little more like a wife and less like a teenager, Mark wouldn't have to work so hard to keep his eyes on you. Evelyn had said just last Christmas, her words a direct attack on the simple black dress Jessica had worn to the family gathering. Each message was like a stone thrown at a glass window, a small, sharp impact that left a crack, weakening the structure over time. Jessica's hands trembled as she scrolled back to the present, to the message that had finally pushed her over the edge. Return the family jewels. You're not worthy to wear them. She could almost hear Evelyn's voice, dripping with condescension, every word a blade meant to cut deep. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway jolted Jessica out of her thoughts. She closed the laptop quickly, her heart pounding as she listened to the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Mark was home. Jessica wiped her hands on her jeans, feeling the sweat that had gathered in her palms. She had spent hours compiling this evidence, hours poring over Evelyn's words, reliving every painful interaction, every moment of humiliation and self-doubt. Now, she had to decide what to do with it. Mark entered the house, his shoulders slumped, his tie loosened around his neck. He looked exhausted, his eyes dark with fatigue. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys onto the side table. "Lily's coming over. Said she wanted to talk to us." Jessica's stomach clenched. Lily, Mark's sister, the one person in the family who had always seemed to see through Evelyn's facade. If there was anyone who might believe Jessica, it was Lily. Jessica nodded, forcing a smile. Did she say what it was about? No, Mark said, sinking onto the couch beside her. But she sounded upset. Jessica's heart thudded painfully against her ribcage. What if Evelyn had already spoken to Lily? What if Evelyn had twisted the narrative, painting Jessica as the villain, the ungrateful daughter-in-law who had refused to return the family jewels? The thought sent a chill down Jessica's spine. She had to be prepared. She had to be ready to defend herself, to prove that she wasn't the one causing trouble, that Evelyn was the true instigator. The doorbell rang, and Mark pushed himself up from the couch with a groan. Jessica watched as he moved to the door, her hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Lily stepped inside, her face pale and drawn. She hugged Mark quickly, then moved toward Jessica, her expression tight. "Hey," Lily said, her voice strained. "We need to talk." Mark frowned, closing the door behind her. "What's going on?" Lily glanced at Jessica, then back at Mark, her jaw clenched. Mom's been saying some things, Lily said, her eyes hard. Things about Jessica. Jessica felt her blood run cold. Evelyn had gotten to her first. Of course she had. Evelyn was always one step ahead, always plotting, always spinning her version of the story before Jessica could defend herself. What things? Mark asked, his brow furrowed. Lily hesitated, biting her lip. She said Jessica was planning to sell the family jewels. Lily said, her voice heavy with disbelief. She said she caught you pawning them off to pay for Mark's bills. Jessica's mouth fell open, her pulse hammering in her ears. That's not true, she said, her voice shaking. I haven't even touched them. They're still in the box, in the drawer. I would never do that. Mark's eyes flashed, his jaw clenched. Lily, that's ridiculous, he said, his voice tight. Jessica wouldn't do that. Lily sighed, her shoulders sagging. I know. That's why I wanted to come here and talk to you first. I didn't believe her, but she was so convincing. She said Jessica was planning to leave you, that she was trying to take everything she could before disappearing. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Evelyn was not just trying to take the jewels. She was trying to take her marriage, her reputation, her very identity. Mark, Jessica said, her voice trembling. I need to show you something. She reached for her laptop, her hands shaking as she opened the document she had been working on all afternoon. The screen glowed bright in the dim room, illuminating the wall of text, the mountain of evidence she had compiled. These are the messages your mother has been sending me, Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. All of them. I've saved every single one. Mark leaned forward, his eyes scanning the screen, his expression darkening with each passing second. Lily moved closer, her mouth set in a grim line. Jessica watched as Mark's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight, a vein throbbing at his temple. I had no idea, Mark whispered, his voice thick with disbelief. All this time I thought she was just being protective. But this is a pattern, Jessica said, her voice stronger now. She's been trying to undermine me from the start. And now she's trying to turn you against me, using those jewels as a weapon. Lily swallowed, her eyes dark with concern. What are you going to do? Mark's eyes were stormy, his chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. I'm going to talk to her, he said, his voice low and firm. She's gone too far this time. Jessica felt a rush of relief, but it was quickly followed by a stab of fear. Confronting Evelyn would not be easy. She was a master manipulator, a woman who had spent years perfecting the art of making Jessica look like the villain while maintaining her own pristine, motherly facade. But this time, Jessica had proof. This time, she wasn't going to back down. And as Mark stood up, his jaw set, his eyes blazing with determination, Jessica knew that the confrontation was only just beginning. Jessica sat alone in the living room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the front door. The house was cloaked in silence, the kind of oppressive stillness that comes before a storm. Mark had left nearly an hour ago, his face set in grim determination, his jaw clenched as he walked out to confront his mother. Jessica had watched him go, her heart pounding, every muscle in her body tense with anticipation. She had wanted to go with him, to be there when Mark confronted Evelyn, but he had insisted on doing it alone. I need to hear from her, he had said, his voice heavy. I need to look her in the eye and see if she denies it. Jessica had nodded, her throat tight, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. What if Evelyn convinced Mark that Jessica was lying? What if she managed to spin some elaborate story, some convoluted excuse that made Jessica look like the villain? Jessica knew how skilled Evelyn was at manipulation. She had spent years perfecting her act, presenting herself as the loving, doting mother while quietly chipping away at Jessica's confidence behind closed doors. Jessica glanced at the clock. 10 more minutes had passed. The knot in her stomach tightened. Her mind drifted back to the conversation with Lily. After Mark had stormed out, Lily had stayed behind, her expression tight with worry. I don't know what she's playing at, Lily had said, pacing the living room, her arms crossed. But I can't believe she would go this far. Jessica had shaken her head, her eyes stinging. You don't understand, Lily. This is what she's always done. She's been trying to turn Mark against me for years. Lily had stopped pacing, her brow furrowed. But why? Why would she do that? Jessica swallowed, her throat dry. Because I took her place. I married her son, and now she doesn't have the same control over him that she used to. Lily's face had fallen, and for a moment, Jessica thought she might cry. I always knew she was difficult, Lily said, her voice a whisper. But I never realized she was this cruel. Now, as Jessica sat alone in the silence, those words echoed in her mind. This cruel. Yes, that was the perfect word for Evelyn. A woman who wore cruelty like a second skin, cloaking it in false warmth and hollow smiles. Jessica's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. Enough was enough. She would not sit here and wait for Mark to return, wondering if Evelyn had managed to twist the truth to manipulate him into believing her lies. Jessica grabbed her keys and stood up, her heart pounding as she made her way to the door. If Mark was going to confront Evelyn, then so was she. The drive to Evelyn's house felt endless, the streets blurring past in a haze of flashing lights and rain-soaked asphalt. Jessica's mind raced with every possible outcome, every potential argument, every conceivable way Evelyn might try to worm her way out of the truth. By the time she pulled into the driveway, her hands were shaking, her heart a drumbeat in her ears. Mark's car was already there, parked crookedly in the driveway, its headlights still on. Jessica's stomach twisted. She could see the faint outline of Mark and Evelyn through the living room window, their figures backlit by the glow of the chandelier. Evelyn was standing with her arms crossed, her posture rigid, her face set in a mask of defiance. Mark was pacing back and forth, his head down, his fists clenched at his sides. Jessica took a deep breath, steeling herself before pushing open the car door. The cold air bit into her skin, the scent of wet grass and damp earth filling her lungs. She marched up the driveway, her heels clicking against the pavement, each step echoing in her mind like the tick of a countdown. When she reached the door, she didn't bother to knock. She pushed it open and stepped inside, the warm air hitting her like a wall. The tension in the room was palpable, a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on her chest. Mark and Evelyn both turned to look at her, their faces identical masks of shock and fury. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn snapped, her eyes narrowing, her lips curling in a sneer. Jessica squared her shoulders, her jaw set. "I'm here to hear what you have to say," she said, her voice steady, and to set the record straight. Mark's eyes darted between them, his face pale and drawn. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "I need you to admit what you did. I need you to tell me why you sent those messages." Evelyn's face twisted, her eyes flashing. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice dripping with false innocence. "Jessica has always been a liar. She's been trying to turn you against me for years. I warned you about her, Mark. I told you she was after your money, that she was using you." Jessica felt her blood boil, her fists clenching at her sides. "Using him?" she said, her voice sharp. "I've been the one keeping this family afloat while you've been trying to tear it apart. And now you're trying to take the jewels back. Jewels you gave me as a wedding gift. Jewels that were supposed to symbolize family and love. But the only thing they symbolize now is control." Evelyn's eyes blazed, her face flushed with fury. "You're not worthy to wear them," she spat. "You're not worthy of being part of this family. You've never been worthy." Mark stepped forward, his jaw clenched, his eyes cold. "Stop," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I've read the messages, Mom. All of them. And I can't believe you would do this to Jessica. To me." Evelyn's face fell, her expression crumbling. "Mark, she's lying," she said, her voice trembling. "She's trying to drive a wedge between us. She wants to take you away from me." Mark shook his head, his eyes dark. "No, Mom. You're the one who's been trying to drive a wedge between us. You're the one who's been manipulating me, trying to make me doubt my own wife. You've been using those jewels as a weapon, a way to keep Jessica under your control. Well, it ends now." Evelyn's face contorted with rage, her hands trembling as she stepped forward. "You're going to believe her over me? Your own mother?" Mark met her gaze, his eyes hard and unyielding. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. Because she's my wife. And you need to get some help. You need to stay away from us. Evelyn's mouth opened and closed, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. You can't do this to me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm your mother. Mark's face softened, a flicker of pain passing through his eyes. I love you, Mom, he said, his voice heavy. But I can't let you destroy my marriage. Not anymore. Evelyn's shoulders slumped, her eyes filling with tears. For a moment, Jessica almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then Evelyn's face hardened, her jaw set, and without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. Mark let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. He turned to Jessica, his eyes dark and haunted. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice thick. I should have seen it sooner. Jessica stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him, holding him close. It's over now, she whispered. We're going to be okay. But as she held him, her eyes drifted to the hallway, to the spot where Evelyn had disappeared. And deep down, Jessica knew that for Evelyn, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot.